The reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park in 1995 has sparked intense public debate from the earliest stage of planning up to the present day. Ralph Maughan, a professor of political science at Idaho State University at the time of our 2003 interview, has closely followed the conflict over that reintroduction program. In our interview, Professor Maughan revealed what he believes are the real reasons behind the public rhetoric of wolf opponents.
Well, I'm a political scientist by training, and I know that there are lots of different types of political conflicts. There are conflicts, for example, over economic issues, and there are conflicts over values issues. And conflicts over values issues are very difficult to resolve because it's hard to split the difference when you're standing up for some kind of a principle. And after the first few years of studying the wolf reintroduction, I became convinced this is almost entirely a values, a cultural issue. It's not an economic issue. Those issues are raised, but they're not the real issues. They're issues about lifestyle. They're issues about what the West is all about. They're issues about the changing West and the demise of a lot of the old extractive occupations. And so the wolf issue is really part of a larger issue. It's not an issue apart. It's related to the issues like timber cutting, grazing, the use of off-road vehicles, the management of our national forests and our national parks, primarily a values issue. And for that reason, it's very difficult to work with people who are opposed to you because there isn't any real economic incentive you can give them, because that's not what they're really complaining about. They're complaining about the fact that wolves have been restored, and that's an assault on their values. So it's extremely divisive, and I think it will remain that way for a long time. Now, the opponents of wolf restoration have a simple, or rather simple set of arguments that they use, and they're a little bit different in that there are basically two groups of anti-wolf people. There's the farmer ranchers, and then there's the hunters. And there's a little bit of overlap, but they use different set of issues. The farmer ranchers use the argument that they're going to kill large numbers of livestock, and they use an economic issue, but that's not really an economic issue because their losses are largely compensated by defenders of wildlife or by other funds in some other states. The actual amount of predation on livestock by wolves has been very low, something like 600 sheep since 1987 and about 400 cows. And I should mention that most of the sheep are lambs and ewes, and most of the cows are actually calves. Not very many full-grown cows have been attacked. You can tell it's a cultural issue by the way they're treated. Wolf attacks on cattle, especially the first ones, but even today, they oftentimes get more news in local news media than a homicide does, which shows you that this is not just a little bit about economics, it's something much bigger. So that's an example. Another example is very much larger losses of sheep and cattle don't get nearly as much media. For example, recently 300 sheep were poisoned near some of the phosphate strip mines near Soda Springs, Idaho, by selenium uptake of Curly-Cup gumweed, which they didn't know would concentrate selenium. And that was a one-day story. And yet the loss of 3 lambs to a wolf might be a several-day story. So I think that shows that it's a cultural matter. Regarding hunting and hunters, not all hunters are opposed to wolf reintroduction, but some of them are, and I think that's largely a values question as well. And it's also a way, in the case of outfitters, of taking the blame off of themselves if their clients don't get an elk. But the argument is that wolves populations will grow rapidly and will continue to grow rapidly, basically forever, until all of the big game is wiped out. And then when that happens, the wolves, as one of the leading spokesmen said, will kill all of the carnivores and then they'll cannibalize themselves. He calls them land piranhas. First of all, there's the belief that wolves don't obey the same characteristics of other animals, where they're population reaches some kind of a peak, and then it goes up and down. Wolf populations grow essentially to infinity, and then they crash. Then there's the argument that the wolves that were reintroduced were not native wolves in Idaho or Wyoming, but they were Canadian gray wolves, which are a different subspecies, for which there's absolutely no biological evidence. You won't find any biologist argue that, and yet that argument is used again and again. And then the third argument is used that the wolves were dumped on the people of Idaho and Wyoming. And in fact, there was a multi-year effort. There were hundreds of meetings carried out. The public education and the public input went on for years and years. Most people thought it may never happen. And yet, within a year, this idea that they'd simply been taken out and dumped on the people became current. Outfitters like to argue that they're losing clients, but I don't see any evidence that outfitters are losing clients. Individual outfitters lose clients, but wolves are a convenient excuse. My father-in-law, my late father-in-law, was an outfitter, and he knew that one of the best things about outfitters was their personality. And the truth is, some outfitters have bad personality and they lose their clients. And it is true that wolves have changed the distribution of elk and other big game. And so elk that were on the meadow for the last 10 years are still around, but they're somewhere else. And so hunting tactics have to change. And people are slow to do that. And the wolf is basically a convenient scapegoat. But there's almost no evidence for an economic impact of wolves. Almost all the evidence is that the impact, though modest, has been positive and largely confined to the area around the northern range in Yellowstone Park, where you're almost guaranteed to see a wolf. And it's made it so communities like Gardner, Montana, Cook City, Montana, now have a lot more visitors on the shoulder seasons and in the winter time than they had in the past, because that's one of the best times to observe wolves.